Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and in this tutorial I'm going to modify my JSON program here so that it actually sends JSON data to my server, which is my Java servlet, but it could be a PHP script or basically anything. So I've got this method here that actually formats my JSON at the moment, and I'm going to rearrange this a bit because I'm going to create a method here called private string format data or something like that. Format data as JSON, let's call it. And this method is going to do all this. It's going to actually get the data that we want to format. So I'll put that in there and I'll return, let's return my JSON here. So where I say root.toString, I'll just return that from the method, return root.toString, and I won't pass toString an integer because I don't want to format this for, actually maybe I will, let's make it human readable. But normally you don't want your JSON to be human readable when you send it to a server, but for the purposes of this demo actually it will be quite nice. And I'll just return null if something goes wrong. And let's also just have a log.d here, and I'll say here can't format JSON. So I'm just rearranging the code from a previous tutorial here, and all we're doing is just formatting some data as JSON and then hopefully returning it from this method. Now in this send data to server method, this method runs when you click the button in this application here. So here I'm going to first get the JSON data that I want to send. So let's say here string JSON equals, and now we can contact the server and send this data. So I've actually already added internet permissions to this application, my JSON uploader here. If I go to the Android manifest, I've added this Android permission.internet, and I've also made sure that my phone is connected to the internet, because otherwise it's not going to work. Let's just save this, and now again I need to contact my server in an async task, because if I don't, I'll get a exception being thrown. And if it were to be allowed, it would look at my user interface, but Android won't even let you contact a server on the main thread. So let's say here new async task, and for the parameters I'll supply void for the first two and string for the last one, because I want to get a string which is going to be the response from the server. I'll open a curly parenthesis here, and at the end I'll say execute to actually run the async task. And I'll click the error here and go to add unimplemented methods. And now I can put some code in here that contacts my server. So let's say here, instead of saying return null, let's say return send data. Actually no, I've already got a send data to server, so I can't use that. Let's say return server get server response. How's that? And I'll create that method. I'll just click this error here and go to create method get server response, and I actually want it to be a method in my top level method in my activity, so I'll add this here. And then I'm just going to click in my async task and right click and go to source, override implement methods on post execute. So this is going to get the actual text that I return in doing background. And in here I'm going to say text view equals text view find view by ID r.id and I gave that text view an ID of output, and then I can just say text view dot set text result, and this result that's passed to on post execute as we've discussed before, is going to be what you return from doing background, which is going to be a string, because that's the third template parameter here. I'm going to return whatever get server response returns. And now in get server response, I can add the code that contacts my server and sends my JSON. And actually I'm going to have to pass get server response my JSON, so let's pass that in here, pass in the JSON, and here I can make this take a string parameter. And now we've kind of dealt with the plumbing. Actually I'm going to have to make this string JSON either final or just move it closer to here. Let's maybe make it final like that, so that I can access it within this anonymous method. And now finally I can write, I've dealt with the plumbing and the rearranging, and now I can actually write the server code that will contact the server. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll return null for a moment just to shut it up and stop it complaining, because it's good to work with a program that's actually compiling. And now to send data to the server, I'm going to use a HTTP post object. So I'll say HTTP post equals new HTTP post, and I can pass a URL to that. And if I just go to my browser, this one I think, and let's just get the URL here of my servlet program that I wrote, just copy that, go back to Eclipse, and I'll just paste this URL in there. So the HTTP post class kind of encapsulates the idea of making a post request. And I need to wrap my JSON string up in a string entity. So I'm going to say string entity equals new string entity, and then I pass the string that I want to send to the constructor of string entity, and that throws a exception. So let's just surround with try catch, and it's always quite tricky to remember everything when you're dealing with kind of code that involves more than one application. So I'm going to actually handle these exceptions, and there are my initials, and I'm just going to say e.toString in there. And so I've got my entity, and now I can say post.setEntity and pass in that entity. And I also want to say post.set header, and I want to set my the header is information that you send to your server. So all kind of get and post requests have headers, and in the header I want to say content hyphen type, capital C on content there and lowercase t on type, and all in lowercase, application / JSON. And that tells the header, that tells the server what kind of data I'm actually sending. And now I'm going to use a default HTTP client, and let's call this client equals new default HTTP client. And this is the thing that's actually going to send the post request, so that like the HTTP post here, that just encapsulates the idea of the actual request, but it's the HTTP client that's actually going to send it. And I'm going to use client.execute, and I'm going to pass in my post execute here, and I also need to have some kind of handler. So let's use a basic response handler, and this is what enables me to get my response from the server. Let's call that handler, and I'll set it equal to a new basic response handler, and I'll pass that as the second argument of my execute. And that also throws an exception, so let's just add catch clause to surrounding try here, and I've got a bunch of possible errors here, and I'm just gonna, in each one of them, I'm just going to handle them by outputting debug stuff saying exception.toString, so that hopefully we'll get a useful error message. And this returns a response, which in this case is going to be a string, and that's going to be the data that my servlet sends back, the stuff that I wrote in my servlet with out.println, or if you had a PHP script, of course, you could you'd send your data back by some other method, but it's just stuff that the servlet, or the server in general, just prints out. That's what we're going to get back here. So let's say string response equals client.execute, and now I'll just say return response, and I'm returning this from my get server response, and get server response is called in doing background in my async task, and it returns a string which on post execute then receives, and it sets the text of the text view in on post execute, because you can only update your GUI in on post execute, you can't update it in doing background in your async task. I think that's all working. If we don't get a response, we're going to return null, and I could say something like unable to contact server. Maybe we'll make it a little bit more robust, but I won't dwell too much on error handling here, because I just want to show you the nuts and bolts of getting this thing working. So let's run this on my phone, and then I can try it out, and hopefully we'll get the stuff back that we've sent. I did remember to send the JSON, didn't I? Yeah, I did. We should get our JSON back, and I also, in the last tutorial, programmed the server to send me back a little message as well. So let's just try this, and I'll go to my screencast. Don't know why, but my taskbar has vanished, and here we go, and I'll click send data, and we'll wait, and there we go. So we've got hello from server, and we've got the JSON that we sent. And the reason I've got that is purely because I told my server to send it back, and it's formatted because I formatted the JSON when I sent it with toString, but you wouldn't normally want to do that. You'd normally want to just compress it as much as possible. So here I'm using toString1, but usually you just use toString. And the reason it looks as it does is just because here in my servlet I sent back hello from server, and I echoed back the JSON, and that's what we're seeing here. So that's it for this tutorial. Have fun with that, and of course you could parse the JSON in your server. If you search for JSON Java, jar or something like that in Google, you'll find a little library that you can include with your servlet to enable you to parse JSON. You can parse JSON in any Java program just by the same kind of method that I've already shown you. So that's it for this tutorial, and until next time, happy coding.